Hi everybody, we're just about ready to start. Hey everybody, it's Maria from Conquer the Clutter. Sorry, it's not even Conquer the Clutter here. I'm here for StashBlaster Quilts. It's been a very crazy day, so I'm very sorry about that. I've been doing my regular business all day, and I'm just in that mode. But anyway, welcome to StashBlaster Quilts. And this is our live stream. It's the first and third Wednesday of every month. Oh boy, you're gonna have to, cut me some slack today. I really apologize. The first and third Wednesday of every month from 7 to 8 p.m. So this week has been just an insane week, and I'll tell you all about that later. But as you know, we start every live with an organizational tip. Now this one is happening today because I received an email from someone who said to me that they were kind of confused in terms of how to handle their fabric. And so one of my favorite topics when I am doing a live class is how to fold your fabric, which will save you some space and some time. So we're going to go ahead and go over that now. I'm going to do it with the PowerPoint instead of doing it live in front of you because it's a little hard to get in here with the ruler and do stuff, but hopefully it'll make a lot of sense. So I'm going to switch to a PowerPoint. So we start here. Now, when we first want to talk about fabric, there's always a question of wash or don't wash. And I personally don't care which side of this particular religious divide you're on, but if you are going to wash fabric, I would really recommend that you go ahead and do it using something called Retain. I don't know why this isn't moving, so hold on one second. Okay. Which is that product on the left, but only if you do not have a high efficiency washing machine. If you do not use Retain in your machine. Your machine is high efficiency because it's got all these little tiny tubes that push the water in from all sides. Therefore, it gets in and it does a better job than if it just came in from the back like the old-fashioned washing machines. But the Retain will gum up those little tiny tubes. And so unless you really want to go shopping for a new washing machine, use Retain in a bowl, rinse the fabric a couple of times, then you can put it in the dryer, or you could even put it through a major rinse if you wanted to in your machine. But don't put the Retain directly in. So I use Retain when I can, and I also use the color catcher sheets. The Retain locks the color into the fabric. The color catchers catch any loose dye that's out and around in the water before it redeposits on another part of your fabric. So I do use both. When I have small pieces, they go into one of those mesh lingerie type bags, and I wash them that way. As I've mentioned before on this live and on some of the other recordings, I do wash on hot and I dry on high, simply to make sure that I get the most color pull as possible and the most shrinkage as possible so that there's a lot less color bleed or shrinking in the final quilt. And the reason that I do that is because a lot of people give me materials because they know how many charity quilts I make, and so I don't want to have a mismatch in my stash. Okay? So let's talk about a stash. Now, I'm sure none of you have sewing rooms that look like this, or like this, or, sad to say, this was my living room floor not that long ago, where I've washed and dried the materials and then I just kind of folded it in half and then folded it in half again and folded it in half again until it went into a pile, and then I just stacked it on the floor until I could do what I'm about to show you. So I've had people ask me if it's really worth it to go ahead and fold the fabric along a ruler. So what do I mean by folding it on the ruler? So you take your fabric and you put it selvage to selvage, okay? And you straighten it out, and then what you do is you lay it on your table. So here it is. This is the selvage here. So those of you who are new to sewing, when you've got a bolt of fabric, the two ends are stitched in such a way that they're extra dense, and we don't use those in our piecing. We want to make sure that those are off because it'll make things not only shrink differently, but it just won't work with your piecing later. So we cut those off later. But you fold the long sides together. And then what you do, okay, come on, is you lay a 6 by 24 inch ruler across. Now your standard bolt will be somewhere in the 44 inch range, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more. So when you fold it in half, it's 22. So your 24 inch ruler works just fine. And the idea is you put that ruler in and fold the fabric back over the top of it, like you see here, so that the edges are aligned. And then you roll it up like a bologna loaf until it's all wrapped around the ruler. Okay? Then you pull the ruler out and you fold it in half the longwise. So now you have a little package that's about 11 inches or so, plus or minus, by a little bit more than 6 inches wide. And the nice thing about that, and the reason I use a 6 instead of a bigger width of ruler, which would mean fewer folds to iron later, is that you can go ahead and count the number of folded edges you have, and each one is approximately 6 inches, so you can see how much yardage you have. If your pattern calls for, let's say, 2 1/3 yards, if you start counting, you know it's going to be a half 1, half 2, half 3, and these are feet. So you keep going, and if you don't have enough yardage, you don't even have to unroll this material. It means you don't have enough for this particular project. A nice advantage is that as it goes around the ruler, it gets to be slightly more than that 6 inches, which gives you a little bit of wiggle room in case the edges aren't cut clean or you need just that little scooch more. So this is why I use a 6-inch ruler. Now, if you have a fat quarter or even a standard quarter yard, once you folded it in half, you fold it in half again. So now you've got more of a square, and that's going to look like this. And what that does is it doubles the folded edge, so it's easier to see what you have in your fat quarter. Okay? So, why do I tell people that why do I tell people that I do it this way? Well, first of all, because I do. But more realistically, this was my wall of fabric, which is what's behind me and this design wall I have up here. So if I were to pull these panels down, you would have seen this before. Now, you can see on the top here in the green, I did have some of it pre-folded, but this little spot was the only area on this entire wall that wasn't crammed with fabric. So what I did is I took the time, I did not iron everything. If you're working with ironed fabric, it actually rolls even smaller. I didn't do that. I just flip folded it as fast as I could on this whole wall. Now I have all this fabric, plus I had 2 bookcases double deep with fat quarters. And now this is what my wall looks like. And if you notice here on the left where my arrow is, these are all fat quarters, and so's the shelf underneath. Same thing over here. You can tell that they're fat quarters because they only go half the depth. All my fat quarters, all that same yardage, fit on my shelves, and the floor is empty, which had been full before, and you can see I've got plenty more room. Now, most people don't have this much fabric. And by the way, this is just a flat wall. I took it from the 2 angles so you could see how much fabric I actually have on this wall. I have enough here for probably 18 months of charity sewing because I make a lot of quilts. For most people, this is more than you're going to use potentially ever. Okay? And it all fits on the wall. It's all nice and neat. It is vertically by color. I used to have it horizontally, but because of the panels, I want to be able to remove a panel and see all of my one color family. So I did reverse the whole thing, and set it up so that if I want, let's say, blue or purple, I only have to take them off this end. I don't have to undo all of it. And so that's what these little dangly things you see here are. They're the holdbacks for my design wall. Okay? So hopefully that's helpful. And so I have found that most people save at least 20% of their space by folding using this method. And you don't have to fold and unfold. You don't have to measure your fabric and put a paper clip or safety pin with the measurement on it, because those almost always get torn off. You don't have to use tape where the glue could wind up going into the fabric, because if you store it long enough it will, and then you get kind of this hard crunchy part of your fabric and the tape is gone or illegible. So with this, I don't have to do any of that. Now you will see on this left hand side, the second actual shelf up, that I do have some bolt type fabrics. I rolled them the same way, but I had so much of that fabric I couldn't fold it in half. That's why they're there. And then the other thing that's missing is the holiday fabric that I had 2 stacks of before, because I used it all up. So there is a slight amount of fabric missing, but you can see I had plenty of room for it and even more. So this is how I handle my yardage. Anything that's a yard or larger gets folded in half. Anything a yard or smaller gets folded into half and then half again in order to fit with my fat quarters. So some of my fat quarters have a lot of meat to them. But this way I know I have less than a full workable yard, because your pattern, if it calls for strips, you need that full width of fabric for the full yard. And I want to know I've got that. And I can tell because it's only been folded once as opposed to twice. So I hope that that's helpful. On another time, we'll talk about how to handle your strips and your squares and your orphan blocks and your odd cuts and things like that. But today, I just wanted to handle the yardage. All right? So I hope that that was helpful. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and close this down and move back to the regular camera. There we go. And I can move my keyboard out of the way. By the way, is this not the coolest keyboard? When my son helped me get the computer that can handle all the broadcasting and everything, I wound up with a computer with a light up keyboard, and it's got rainbows that go around and around on my, here, I'll show you. So you can probably see the color changing going on inside my computer case, and it's got glass on the side, so you can really see it going. So it's kind of fun to walk by the studio at night, or when I'm going to bed, and it's got all these bright lights going. It's just fun. And you know what? That's what this is all supposed to be. So I like it. I'm doing it. All right, I'm going to move you in closer to me again. There we go. Okay, so the last time we were here, I was sewing the StashBlaster 1 quilt using a white background and blue and green as my color families, and I just did one color family for each quilt. So I thought I'd show you where we are at this point. I am working on the video so that it can go in addition to the pattern that's available on the website for free. If you want to make one of the StashBlaster quilts, and I've got regular quilts and StashBlaster quilts, if you want to make a StashBlaster quilt for charity, you are welcome to do so. You don't need to ask my permission for that. You can do it as a guild event. I do have a lot of guilds that hire me to come out and help them do that, but I'm happy to, talk to a representative of yours and walk you through what would be involved. I really believe in putting out charity quilts when they're needed in quantity, but nice and different. So feel free. Okay, so with my blue and green quilts, I did not do the normal width of fabric that I do for these. I took all my little short squiggly ends out of my drawer. Now, to go into my drawer, it has to be at least 12.5 inches long, but by the time I trimmed it up and things, I found that with my green ones here, on at least 2 occasions, my strip wasn't 12.5. So what did I do? I cut them 11.5. Good enough. No one will ever know. No one will ever care. So tonight I'm going to sew the green quilt together. The blue quilt, I don't think I'm going to sew tonight because it would involve taking down the design wall, because I cut these at 6.5. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my horizontals here. I'm going to do those in red. So I'm going to have red, white, and blue as a charity quilt. It does mean that on some of these I'll want to flip them end to end so that it looks like I have more strip sets than I do. And it's going to change my length. The width is the same because I use the same size and same number of strips. But probably next time I'll sew this with the red, and so you can see kind of what I have. And by the end of that session, that quilt will be assembled as well. So that's what I'm going to be doing here. I know that you can't really see a whole lot. So I'm going to sew the green one, while I yammer, because that's what I do. We know that that's what I do. I am also going to occasionally check. Oh, now it's saying I'm not live streaming. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I was just looking to see. I've been having the worst time trying to get on when I'm doing the live stream. So I am going to check occasionally just to make sure if there's anybody watching live who has any questions. Okay. So let me work on that. This whole process has been a learning thing for me, and so I want to make sure that I have it. This whole process has been a learning thing for me, and so sorry about that. Okay. So I do want to make sure that if there is anybody who wants to ask a question, that I'm here for that. Okay. So back to it. So I was telling you I had a very weird week this week. I did. One of the worst parts of it was that my husband cracked up my car. Not badly, just badly enough it needs repair. So I need to put this under my desk here. Here we go. Okay. For those of you who haven't watched before, this box has a dowel, and the dowel is holding a spool full of the fabric that I need as my sashing on my rows. So I put it underneath my desk, and then I spool the fabric straight up and into my machine. So I'll put this here so you can see. Now first, I'm going to say I was sewing a black quilt the last time I was doing this, so I need to change my thread color. So I'll do that while I chat. So anyway, my husband Scott messed up my car, and so I've been driving his. Now the instant I swear that car knew that I was going to be driving it for the better part of a week, the air conditioning stopped. So I have been driving around with the windows open. Now, if anybody's watching this from further away, it has been approximately somewhere between 90 and 98 degrees every day. So I've been a happier camper. It also means that even if I pull my hair back into a ponytail, I wind up with hair just flying everywhere and in my face and all over the place, which is one reason why I don't tend to drive with my windows open. But this has not been an option. So we just took the car into the shop this morning, and so now we're trying to arrange for a rental, and so hopefully I'll have one in the next couple of days, and I will be able to drive an air-conditioned vehicle, which will be nice. By the way, if your machine doesn't have a threader, and you are looking at a different machine, I would seriously consider it. It doesn't always work. It depends on the needle and the thickness of the thread, but my eyes are starting to go, and even though I saw the eye doctor and they gave me a new prescription, whenever they get dry or tired, I lose that, I lose the clarity enough to be able to see the needle easily. Okay, so here's my thread from underneath. You can see it here under my little plastic platform here. So I'm going to go ahead and just tuck it under. All right. And move over slightly. Okay, so I have, let me switch here. So I have my strips here. I pressed them, in this case, towards the colored material. With the black background, I would press towards the black. The advantage to doing it that way is that even with the sashing, the colored block lays flat, which is nice. In this case, when I sew this and then I go to press, and if I press it back this way, I'm going to have more bulk in this variety, but I'm okay with that, to not have that shadowing happening behind. Even if you trim it back, the white and white, you can see the difference. So I don't tend to do a lot with a bright white like this. I tend to do more with a white on white or a cream, because you don't see the fact that there's extra layers behind as easily. But I just wanted to do white the other day, so that's what I'm going to do. So one of these sets is going to have a sashing strip on both ends. So I'm going to run this first one through and then the rest of them, and then the first one I'm going to run through again, rotated 180 degrees, so there's a white strip on both ends. Now, normally I would press in between, and then I would sew the pressed sets together, but in this case, I really don't have to. So, assuming that there's time tonight while we're here together, I will go ahead and just assemble the whole top, and then press it later downstairs. Okay? So, let's switch back to camera 3. But anyway, yeah, this has just been the craziest of weeks. There were 3 days in a row when I couldn't even buy a green light. If I had to go somewhere, every single light was either yellow or red. And I'm one of those crazy people that actually stops for yellow lights. So I make a lot of people unhappy. But I do it. So I was just running late. I wasn't actually late very often, but I kept having that really anxious feeling that I was going to be late all week. So that could have been better. But all in all, it's only Wednesday. It feels like it's been a week and a half already, but that's okay, because tonight with you, I get to do some sewing, and so that makes me feel good. I do tend to have a needle down in this situation. I forgot to tell you that, and set my needle. So I did do some looking into Gnome Angel's 100 Blocks, 100 Days. I've been meaning to start that, but work has been so busy that I'm afraid I haven't been able to. If you're doing any sort of a quilt along or something along those lines, let me know. I'd be happy to talk about it here, and let people know about them. Quilt alongs are a lot of fun. I have, alright, sneak peek. I am working on something similar for us as a group. Once I have enough subscribers and members, I have this really big project planned, and so I'm really hoping that that this works because I have been sewing and filming like a mad woman. But it should be a lot of fun, and so I'm hoping that people will enjoy it. But like I said, if you're part of a quilt along, a row by row, if you're working on any sort of a project and you'd like to share, I would love to see photos. I will share it with everyone, and we can just kind of enjoy that. And so you're seeing what I'm sewing. I'd love to see what you're sewing. So anyway, I have been doing a lot of crazy work, and so there was this one house that I was in, and I wound up, the lady who owns it, oh, there we go, it's not too messed up, okay. The lady that owns the house thought that the air conditioning worked, but we've been working in it, and it's been somewhere in the 95 to 97 degree temperature inside. And so I went ahead and took her thermostat apart this week. And so I took it apart, and then I reset where the little slide bar is that went from heat to off to cold, and we actually have air conditioning now. So I'm a very happy lady. That's where I'm going tomorrow. But we have just been very busy. And one of the things, I am going to be at Vienna Community Center on Monday. Let me check the time real quick. Alright. I'm going to be doing a downsizing lecture. So if you're nearby at the Vienna Community Center on Cherry Street, the lecture starts at 10 o'clock. It goes from 10 to 11, and I'd love to see you there. It's just about downsizing and, well, actually it's more about paperwork. They sent me a list. They said they wanted downsizing, but they really, really wanted paperwork. So it's mostly going to be on paperwork, but I'll be accepting questions on regular downsizing as well. So if you can make it, I would love to see you there. Next month, I'm not going to be able to do quite as much posting. I'll still be doing the lives, but I am going to be going to Phoenix in August, because why wouldn't you want to be in Phoenix in August? Because I'm speaking at a convention, the Crisis Intervention Team International Conference. And so I'm going to be talking about hoarding disorder to fire marshals, code control officers, ambulance, EMTs, animal control, all those kinds of agencies, adult protective services, child protective services. And we're going to be talking about hoarding disorder and what's involved with it and how to work with citizens with that problem and be successful. So that's going to be fun. But I'm flying in, I believe, on a Sunday night. Sunday night. So I'm going to get there really late. And then I'm speaking at like 3:30 in the afternoon, which will feel like dinner time to me. And then flying back the next morning. So I'm not going to get to see much of Phoenix. I know that there's a quilt shop there, True Blue quilt shop. I'm hoping to get a chance to get over there and see their setup. The question is just going to be, can I get there either early enough, well, I doubt I can get there early enough, that I can be up and around and ready and do it before I have to go back to the hotel and get ready for the speech. So that's going to be a little tough, but I am going to give it a shot. I love to go and visit quilt shops when I'm traveling in a new city. And often what I'll do, now, if this wasn't Phoenix, if this was maybe halfway across the country, like Denver, I've driven to Denver. There was one year I drove to Denver 3 times in 1 year. But what's nice if I drive is that we contact quilt shops along the way and we see if they'd be interested in having me speak. And so I get to go in and check all these little places out along my route. A couple years ago, I was at a convention in Florida, in Orlando, And so I not only got to spend an extra couple days in Orlando, which was nice, but I had a shop in North Carolina and one in South Carolina and one in Georgia, and it was wonderful. So I got to meet a whole bunch of new people. Um, my main lecture that I do is on sewing room organization. So I spent, it's supposed to be an hour. It's usually an hour and a half. So I spent a bunch of time with them, and we got to talk about a whole bunch of things. But what's interesting is that every shop's a little different. You would think that there would be a limited amount of fabric out there. There'd be a limited number of ways to set up a fabric store. It's amazing how different they all are. Even here, where I am in Virginia, there's shops that specialize in material for Civil War quilts, because a lot of the Civil War happened here. There's modern shops. There's contemporary, which I don't consider contemporary and modern the same. There's some more that are a little bit more all-purpose, and so they're a really good fit for the beginner. There's some that are more for art quilts, and so they'll carry material that a regular quilt shop doesn't. So there's a huge variety just in my little neck of the woods. So it's really kind of cool. When I was speaking in Corpus Christi, Texas, unfortunately, it was really close to when the Houston show is. So the quilt shop that was going to hire me realized that and said that they couldn't hire me. But the quilt shop owner picked me up at the hotel, drove me around, showed me Corpus Christi from the point of view of a native. She explained the weird way that the winds come in off the bay, and so the trees grow in unusual shapes, and you can tell right where the hurricanes came through and all that. And so she not only took me to see her shop, but she took me to see 2 other quilt shops that were also very different and carried material I'd never seen. So I love to do that. So I'm really hoping I get a chance to see the shop in Phoenix. Okay, so anyway, back to this. So I'm going to be doing that in August. So that's going to be pretty cool. That's assuming, of course, that I'm going in next week and having a brain scan, an MRI. I've been having a little bit of vertigo, nothing major, but they want to take a look. And I already have a base set of scans in the system. So they're just looking for changes. I'm okay, I promise you. But my husband, of course, keeps picking on me, saying, well, they're going to go and take a look and they're not going to find anything in there. And he means it in terms of nothing bad, but he gets this twinkle in his eye that just says, no, there's just nothing in that skull. So I'm doing that this week too. So there's just tons going on. Anyway, so as you can see, I'm going to be busy coming and going. You are welcome at any point to shoot me questions at my email, which is mail, M-A-I-L, at StashBlasterQuilts.com. And whenever I get questions there, I make sure that I cover them here during the lives, like I did today with the question about storing fabric. And so, by the way, that's the way I store fabric. There's tons of other ways. And so we can talk about some other ways maybe next time. I just need to get some pictures. I had to run and pick up photos from a client just before this live today. She is in a assisted living and has to sell her home. And so I took a whole ton of photos, like almost 200 photos of items for her to look at in the photos. On the printouts that I made. And then she marked the items that she wanted me to pack for her to keep. And so, unfortunately, I'm going to be at her place at 8 in the morning. This is the one where I got the air conditioning working. Yay! But since I have to be there so early, I had to drive an hour each way to go and pick them up. And the sad thing is that where she's staying right now is only about 15 minutes from her house. So I drove more than 2 hours round trip to pick up the photos, and then tomorrow I'll have to drive 2 hours round trip to go to her house. So it's kind of sad that we couldn't work it out for me to pick them up sooner when I was already in the area. But that's okay. So I got back just in time to grab some dinner and get up here and get this thing going. So that's why I don't have photos of all the other ways. I had this ready already. But I did not get a chance to add some of the other options. But believe me, there's tons. One of the things to keep in mind is that you don't have to spend a lot of money to store materials. You don't have to spend a lot of money on the structure around sewing. You also don't have to buy a billion tools and toys. They're fun to have, don't get me wrong. I love rulers. I don't know what it is about rulers. Whenever I go to a quilt show, there's always these really cool rulers that are supposed to make your life so much better and the sewing easier and faster and more precise and all of this. Special irons and special markers and different kinds of templates and all of that. They're very cool. Don't get me wrong. I love them. Just like I love office supplies. For some reason, me and office supplies, we were obviously intended for each other. But I have to remind myself the same thing I tell my clients. Some of the most amazing quilts I've ever seen were sewn by someone with a needle, thread, and scissors. And the most important thing, imagination. So, if they could do it, we can do it. We may not want to. We may want all the toys. But do I really need them? No. I usually set myself a limit. I can buy one new toy and a certain amount of fabric if I go to a quilt show. And the fabric has to be something that I love and I haven't seen locally. Because if I've seen it locally, I should buy it from my local quilt shop. A lot of people go to the quilt shop and they get a lot of help. And then they go online and they buy fabric. It may be the same quality, but it's probably not. But they buy it online because it's cheaper. The ladies and men who work in the quilt shop are a wonderful resource. But they're not free. Somebody pays them a salary or hourly wage or whatever. Or they're the owner and they've invested a lot in the materials and the building and things like that. So if you have a quilt shop near you that carries the kind of fabrics that you like, I'm not saying that you have to go to that Civil War place and buy fabric from them if you don't like it. But support your local quilt shops or they're going to go away. And if you're stuck, there's no better resource for you than being able to walk in with a problem and talk to somebody knowledgeable about how to fix it. Or if you're not confident in picking colors, you take maybe a focus fabric that you really love and they can help you get all the rest of the materials you need for your quilt. There's classes. One of my local quilt shops here, you can rent time on a long arm machine. So if you don't have one, but you don't want to pay someone else to do the quilting because you want to do it yourself, you can. You can rent the time to do it. So there's lots of benefits. So if I haven't said it before, or you haven't been on here in the last couple weeks or heard me say it any other time, please keep in mind that your local quilt shops deserve your love and attention. Okay? All right, so, sorry, lecture over. Anyway, so I do set myself some limits, and so I don't wind up with a ton of extra fabric. Now, you're probably looking at the screen here and saying, wait a minute, I just saw that you have a ton of fabric. Well, that's true. But unlike most people that have stashes that are huge like mine, I actually use it. And you've only seen part of it. You've only seen the part that's behind this wall. The stuff that I've processed, all the squares and all the strips, are on the wall behind you. So I have several bins and drawer units full of already cut squares and strips, and some bricks. Plus I have some orphan blocks, and I have some leaders and enders that I've made. And so I have, giant bins full of half square triangles and of 4 patches and things like that. In fact, sometimes I just come in here and I sew those because maybe I don't want to work on a major quilt that I'm working on, especially if it's being recalcitrant, if it's being difficult. I swear sometimes my quilts have an attitude problem, and I need to give it some time to think about what it's done. So instead of sewing on it, I will sew some of my leaders and enders together. I make a ton of them, so they're always ready to go. So I have a drawer over here, not a drawer, excuse me, a shoebox. Here, I'll show you. Okay. You can see some pins here because I pinned them together because I'm just tossing them in here. If I just laid them in, they'd get mixed up. If I was just sitting here, if I was going to be able to do this full time, then I would just have them stacked up and ready to go. But I don't because I can't. But I can just pull these out and then run them through my machine, and I can be either as a leader and ender, or I can just run them and run them and run them and run them and run them, because then I have 4 patches already sewn. They're ready to put into a quilt, so that next quilt is going to go together much quicker because I've already done 2 of the major sets of sewings. What a lot of people forget, because they think of assembling the quilt and they think of how fast the strip sets attach to the sashing, but you have to do the pre-sewing first. And so if you're doing, let's say, a quilt full of half square triangles, I don't have it handy. I have had in the past, you can look at one of my old videos, there's a quilt that has all red and white half square triangles done in diamond shape. Okay? Sewing all those half square triangles is half of the total amount of sewing that quilt needed. I did mine in little dribs and drabs, and so when I designed the quilt, I was already half done with the assembly. So for me, sometimes just having those prepped and ready to go means that I can get a quilt done in maybe a couple of days that would have taken me a week, because I've already done a bunch of the pre-sewing. So like with 4 patches like this, you have these seams first, and then you're going to have this seam. So you're going to have probably it's going to be closer to 2/3 of the sewing done if you're doing an all 4 patch quilt, simply because the 4 patches will all be together already. Now in this particular case, these are leftovers from StashBlaster 3, and so someone else actually did these seams. I'm just putting them together. So there's a whole story about StashBlaster 3, and we'll get into that another time. But the idea is simply, I just have this box full, and it just sits over here. I have a footstool in case I want to put my feet up while I'm working, and so I can just pull them out and run them through whenever I want. Okay? Alright. But anyway, they're called leaders and enders because you need to start whatever row you're sewing with your foot flat. And so if you do what I did earlier and just run the first 2 pieces through, sometimes you'll get a little nest behind there. And so if you use leaders and enders, you avoid that because they hold the back side, like this pair is holding the back side of the foot up. So I'm sewing flat. When you get to the end, you put another pair through, because then what will happen is that then you can cut behind the foot and have your full item, your full row, if you're assembling rows or whatever pieces, all complete. You don't have one oddball still sitting here in the machine waiting for you to sew again. Now I will admit, sometimes I will go ahead and assemble 2 quilts at the same time. So I've already done a bunch of the piecework on it, etc. And so now I'm doing sashings or whatever. If I'm using the same thread, I will often just go ahead and do row A of quilt 1 and then row A of quilt 2. And then row B of quilt 1 and then row B of quilt 2. So each quilt acts like a leader or ender for the other. So when I was sewing these quilts, I did blues and then greens and then blues and then greens until these strip sets were all put together. And then at the end I put an ender, and then it becomes the leader for the next one. So when you sew it, you leave it under this back part of the foot, and so when you start your next strip set, you're going to be level again. But by doing my rows that way, I got even more done in less time. So it works, but you have to be really prepared to do that. Most people are not trying to do multiple quilts at the same time. I just happen to be somebody who does. If you want to start doing that, then start thinking ahead so that your quilts are basically at the same stage of production at the same time. It may mean spending an extra day or two on one of them to either catch it up, or if it's more intricate, keep it up. And then when you get to the sashing stage or whatever, your rows will be ready, or the squares or whatever it is that you're doing, so that you can do that. It's just as easy, though, to have a stack of leaders and enders and just do them separately. Okay, I'm going to take a quick look here. I am presuming it's just a couple of us here. Oh, okay, so there are 2 of us, but there's no one else who's left a message, so that's fine. I'm going to go back to what I was doing. So there we go, as long as we don't have questions. But like I said, don't forget, you're welcome to send questions to StashBlasterQuilts.com. The website is StashBlasterQuilts.com. If you like the organizational tips, if you like these silly stories that I tell about my week and things like that, strange things that I'm doing, and little tips and hints along the way, please click subscribe, and then there's the bell. It'll let you know when I post something else. I have not only the live, which is on the 1st and 3rd Wednesday of every month, but I am going to be putting out more general videos. So for example, the Stash Blaster 1, which is the one that's behind me here, so you can see it again. I'm doing a how-to video for this. It's almost done. I have probably another 2-3 hours of editing, and then it will hopefully be ready to be posted. In terms of posting, the lives are posted and are up until the next one comes out. So this one obviously will get posted immediately because it's on right now, and that's an automatic. I'll probably put the other one from last time down sometime tomorrow. So if you haven't seen it, you still have a little bit of time to go and look at it. But the idea with all the lives and doing them so often is I want to build kind of a community where people can just come and hang out and maybe learn something, but also, share ideas and just relax. Things get so busy these days. I find that if I don't schedule a time to relax, I don't take the time to relax. And it winds up making me a very mean lady. In fact, at one point, I was on the phone with someone yesterday, and she was just annoying me. It was medical. They were calling me about about the scan thing that I was going to do. And so they were asking me about, can I get online, and am I doing this and the other? And I got really frustrated. And when I got off the phone, I looked at Scott and I said, am I crazy, or was that just, a stupid way that they were doing it? And he looked at me and he said, well, she was not as clear as she could have been, but you are maniacally angry right now. Oh, okay. I said, I know that I'm a little irritated, but I didn't know I was being mean or anything. And he said, yeah, you're a little over the edge. So when the lady came back on and we finished up what we needed to do, I thanked her, and I tried to make sure that I ended nicely, because, just because I'm in a bad mood does not mean that I need to make somebody else's day bad. So, I do try. But at that point, I said, okay, tomorrow, because this was yesterday, I said, tomorrow I have my live stream. So that's going to be good. I'm going to get some sewing done, and I'm going to get to relax. And my original plan for my day today had been to prep for this a little bit more and to just do some sewing and get calm. But like I said, life has just not been my friend lately. And so I had things that I had to do instead. But that was my plan. I actually scheduled some chill down time. So I don't know if other people get as crazy busy as I do. But if you do, please treat yourself well and schedule yourself for some downtime. And I'm hoping that you're going to pick every first and third Wednesday of the month for some scheduled downtime with Maria. Bring a cup of tea. You can see what I'm working on. I've got about 10 projects planned out to work. And my thing is that I'm hoping to pick one or two, like this one, that I'm going to do most of while I'm here on the live, so that you can actually watch it as it progresses. I don't want it to be anything super crazy or super fiddly to do. I want it to be something that someone who's new can do. So if you want to sew along with and kind of see how it's going, and then you can shoot me questions if you run into a problem along the way, and we can address it during the next live. So that's kind of what I'm looking for. I want this to be a very supportive and helpful group where we can go ahead and just relax and help each other out when we get stuck. So that's the idea. Okay, that was the last green strip. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and cut my thread here. Sorry, this has to be down to do that. Okay, and then I have, oops, I had to put my keyboard down and it's blocking my drawer here. So I've got my scissors here. I'm going to cut this off. Okay, just tuck this over here so it's out of the way. And then you're going to watch the conveyor belt kind of go in reverse here as I pull my strips up. Normally I would go over to the other side and simply pick up the box that these all land in, but you would wind up having to see my tush as I cut up and around and things like that. And if I can avoid that, I think it's only the fair thing to do. Okay, that should be the last one. Okay, so this is the first set that I sewed, and here's number 2. Okay, so once they're all nice and straight. Now, if you're nervous about cutting them apart, okay, because you're afraid, hold on. Okay, can you see that? No. Okay, so hold on, let me take you on a little bit of a ride here. Okay, here we go. That's better. So when I sewed this, I left a little gap here. If you're not comfortable that you're going to be able to cut these apart and have them not go in where they shouldn't go, then you can always leave more room. Okay, I just happen to go ahead and do it fairly close. So what I do is I fold it in half like this, and I line up my cut edges like that. And so I don't have a lot here, but you can see there's just a little bit extra. And then I can take my scissors, like so, and they're both going to press out just fine. Okay, because I got a little tiny bit extra here. And so when I bring it up, I'll straighten it out. So why did I just cut this fabric? Oh, this thread is just from the torn edge, so I can go ahead and cut that without a problem. Okay. If you remember at the beginning, I mentioned that one of these strips is going to have a sash on both ends. So that's what I'm going to do now, is I'm just going to go ahead and feed this back through. Here's my sashing strip. And that's just to hold it in place while I get this ready. Now, I could have ended, hold on. Okay, I could have put a leader and ender through first. And in fact, I think I will, to show you how that works. In this particular case, I would have put it through at the end of the other one, but because I have the sashing strip that was still under, I would have had to turn the whole thing sideways and then put the ender through and then clip, and that's really hard to follow on the video. So that's why I didn't do it. Okay, now I'm going to needle down and back up to make sure that my bottom thread is here. This is why sometimes I don't bother with the automatic cutter. Sometimes I just give it a yank and then use scissors. Okay, so this one's pinned kind of weird. Let me explain to you why I did this. I like when I am doing my 4 patches and I'm doing the second side to have the top fabric have the flap of the pre-sewn seam up and forward, so that way it kind of presses these two together so that they nest even tighter. So that's what works for me. A lot of people don't do it that way, or they don't care. I just find that for me, I tend to get a better match. These 2 edges had already been cut. These 2 were off, and it just worked. So usually they just line up nice and neat. This time it was a little weird, but I did it because I want this first part to lead its way in. Okay. You sew to the end of the 4 patch, needle down. Let me put these pins in my pin cushion. I always have pin cushions everywhere. I use sand pin cushions because I think that they help keep my needles sharper. Now I'm going to go ahead and line this up, but if you notice, I'm not worrying about lining it up exactly because I'm going to trim just to make sure that we're nice and square later. If you wanted to, you could also pin your sashing to your strips if you're a pinner. There's nothing wrong with that. I do a lot of pinning downstairs because I do all my ironing downstairs. But in a situation like this, all I need to do is line it up and sew, so I didn't take any time for pinning. Again, this particular quilt is designed for rapid assembly, and the more you pin, the slower you're going to go. Both in the fact that you're taking the time to pin, but also during assembly because you have to take all those pins out as you go. You don't want to sew over your pins. Okay. So we line her all up. Okay, it's almost 8 o'clock. I have promised that I will not keep you past 8 so that you can go on and do other things. So I hope you all have a great week. Please remember to subscribe and hit the bell, and hopefully like the videos as you watch them. And I will see you here the first and third Wednesday of every month. Take care, have a good time, relax, and let's go to do some more sewing, okay? Bye.